Hello, my name is Noah Korak, and this is my presentation on the NSA and cybersecurity that accompanies my final report for CSET 4850. So let's start off with the origins of the NSA. The NSA was not formally created back in World War I, but that is where we can trace its origins back to. Back in World War I, messages were sent by the Axis forces over telegram. These messages were scrambled using ciphers to prevent interception. Eventually, though, the US caught on and slowly started dedicating more and more resources to create these very large rooms. And these rooms is where they contained and constructed their deciphering machines. They weren't as advanced as the Turing machine later on in World War II, but they did help the employees of these decoding divisions break the codes significantly faster. Eventually, as the amount of resources grew, the U.S. Army formally created, or rather informally as it was a secret, the Division of Military Intelligence, Section 8, or MI8. MI8's only job was to gather intelligence on anything pertaining to the war. They would spy on foreign governments and even on domestic citizens, using things like phone taps and telegram taps. Sometimes they would even go through the mail of certain citizens. This information would be kept at one of MI8's facilities and manually analyzed to ensure that there was no pertinent information when it came to the war. Eventually, MI8 got so familiar with the types of patterns that the Axis forces were using to encode their messages that they became the authority on encoding US messages. This was because they knew how the enemy was prone to encode their messages. They could recognize their patterns, so MI8 was able to develop a completely different way of enciphering US messages in order to avoid Axis interception and decoding. In 1919, shortly after the end of World War I, the U.S. Army dissolved MI8 as a military operation. However, MI8 was given to the State Department and was given the power to spy almost exclusively on U.S. citizens. Phone and telegram taps were still being used, as well as mail interception. This new form of MI8 was renamed the Black Chamber, and some declassified documents suggest that the Black Chamber was involved in more activities than just spying. The Black Chamber continued to operate like this until 1929, when the State Department disbanded the initiative for good. In its place, the Navy launched Operation Research Desk. This new operation lacked the directive to spy on citizens and was instead given the mission of keeping U.S. intelligence secure by detecting under-the-table organizations and monitoring those who are classified as persons of interest. As World War II ramped up, the Navy eventually realized that it needed to create a new decoding division. This division was called the Office of Naval Communications Code and Signal Section. This new division was kept separate from Research Desk, as it was more focused on foreign intelligence interception. These two operated separately until after the end of World War II. Once World War II was over, the Army, State Department, and Navy all merged their intelligence initiatives together into the State Army-Navy Communications Intelligence Board, and this was then given to the State Department. This was to give central powers more control over how it could be used, rather than having to go through the military process in order to take advantage of this new bureau's capabilities. Following World War II, the government went through a period of mass expansion where the federal government was allocated more money in order to create social programs and public works. As this trend continued, President Harry Truman signed the National Security Act in 1947. The general idea of this act was to give the federal government more tools to formulate banks of information on other countries of the world, and thus create a more robust and comprehensive foreign policy. This act created the possibility to spend more money on security-focused programs, specifically those that engaged in intelligence collections. This directly caused the formations of many of the intelligence bureaus that we have today, though the most notable were the Central Intelligence Agency and the National Security Council. The CIA was formed as a subordinate of the State Department, and the National Security Council was a new division of the executive. As part of the President's cabinet, the National Security Council was not given much power to act alone. However, it did have access to military resources, as it was a member of the executive branch. The National Security Council created the Armed Forces Security Agency to be the foremost authority on intelligence security. While the CIA was more active in gathering intelligence on other countries, the Armed Forces Security Agency would use surveillance to ensure that U.S. intelligence was safe. However, as the Armed Forces Security Agency grew in scope, the Central Powers once again wanted more control without the military attachments. The Armed Forces Security Agency was dissolved as a military entity and renamed the National Security Agency before it was reinstated as a subordinate of the State Department. Just as in the past, the NSA is the sole authority on the security of American intelligence and now data today. This is still largely done through the use of surveillance, but obviously the methods of surveillance have changed to cover the realm of cyberspace and the internet. The NSA has also evolved over time to be the authority that determines the best new ways to secure federal cyberspace, such as government databases and governmental specific cyber programs and software like operating systems. The NSA has also become responsible for giving the okay on every new machine or software that gets employed into the federal system. Though the NSA originated from past organizations with unrestricted access to domestic surveillance, recently there have been more and more checks on the power given to the NSA. As the digital presence of American grows, so does the surveillance of the NSA. For most of the digital age, many Americans have voiced concerns over their privacy. Some Americans who had suspicions of the NSA spying on them were treated as conspiracy theorists until the summer of 2013. Edward Snowden, a then employee of the NSA, leaked records from within the NSA showing the mass collection of digital information of American citizens. Snowden created an uproar amongst the American people, and the NSA became a symbol of distrust of the federal government. Since then, the American people have become more aware of the surveillance of the cyberspace they occupy, and the NSA has claimed to have changed its internal data collection policies. Critics of the NSA claim that the surveillance the organization engages in is a gross violation of the Fourth Amendment, which states that citizens and their privacy are safe from unreasonable searches. Many NSA critics are quick to contrast the Fourth Amendment with the Public Law 110-261, Section 102, a law that is still active today, which states, other than by express statutory authorization, FISA and the procedures of Chapters 119, 121, and 206 of the Federal Criminal Code shall be the exclusive means by which electronic surveillance and the interception of domestic wire, oral, or electronic communications may be conducted. Essentially, that law means that the NSA can legally spy on domestic communications only if it is done over wiretaps, electronic and cyber communications like email, or by physically being within a close enough proximity to hear oral speech. With the exception of mail, this covers all the ways citizens speak with each other in modern times. As said before, this law still stands despite these criticisms. The changes in NSA policy include putting a stop to targeted surveillance of non-persons of interest. However, the NSA still has the power to hold up to a year's worth of anyone's digital footprint, regardless of interest, and can still specifically target the data collection of U.S. citizens overseas. The NSA has also stated that policy has been changed to make it very difficult for any unauthorized employees to access any data storage locations. When it comes to the legislation of laws surrounding cybercrimes, the NSA is not directly involved, as it is a part of the executive branch. However, their expertise is still used, as these types of laws follow the best practices that have been formed by the NSA over the years. Currently, the NSA classifies Russia and China as the top security threats to the US when it comes to cyber attacks. Nearly all of the most recent cyber attacks have come from Russia, China, and Iran. Two attacks in October of 2020 came from Iranian and Chinese hacker groups. The Iranian group stole the contact information of millions of Americans. They then began disseminating false information regarding the 2020 presidential election and intimidation tactics through email. Again in October, reports began circulating that China and North Korea had been gathering the internet activity and emails of American politicians and lobbyist groups. In September of 2020, Russian hackers initiated a ransomware attack on a major U.S. health firm, rendering hundreds of hospitals inoperable while the patient records and hospital systems were reverted to backups. This caused some surgery reschedules and general confusion for a short time in these hospitals. In order to combat attacks such as those, the NSA formulated its own guidelines on security and published these guidelines to the public. The NSA CSS Technical Cyber Threat Framework, which provides detailed information on cyber attacks, paired with the Common Criteria, a set of standards that have been adopted by the NSA, formulate the security plan of action that the NSA uses. Also, the NSA works with the Department of Defense and their National Defense Strategy to strengthen the way that the NSA secures the data of millions of Americans. The Common Criteria is a set of standards that are sponsored by the NSA and National Institute of Standards and Technology. In 2001, the NSA hosted a conference on the Common Criteria that was attended by international governments, scholars, and security professionals. Shortly after this conference, the Common Criteria standard was put into practice in over 17 countries worldwide and became an ISO standard. The United States is by far the leading user of the Common Criteria. The U.S. government uses the Common Criteria to secure databases, to develop government OSs, and to control network access and data security. In addition, any new system that the government wants to put in place needs to be Common Criteria certified. In addition to using the Common Criteria, the NSA also employs the National Defense Strategy from the Department of Defense. This strategy focuses on ways to combat Russian and Chinese interception of American data. While the NSA security framework tends to be very detail-oriented, the National Defense Strategy focuses more on strategies. It works well when details are filled in with the NSA framework. The NSA's framework and the Department of Defense's National Defense Strategy currently forms the guidelines that are being used by the NSA and the Department of Defense in order to secure America's data and the privacy of all of American citizens.